Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are delighted to be running this webinar jointly with Energy Networks Australia. So for the webinar today, I would like to initially acknowledge the traditional owners on which land that I'm on, which is the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people here in Canberra. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Indigenous people that might be joining us today. So we have two key reports that are being featured in today's session and well timed by Energy Networks Australia and Bioenergy Australia. We were both working on them at the same time and they speak really well to each other. So we decided to jointly release the reports at the same time and to hold this webinar. Now, for Bioenergy Australia, one of the key reasons for this particular report was to get ahead of the Energy and Climate Ministers meeting, which is taking place this Friday in Sydney, and where renewable gas, biomethane, biogas is actually going to be on the agenda. So we're delighted that the policy positions are going to be discussed and thought about, and that the government is now starting to take a really serious look at the role of renewable natural gas, biomethane, for decarbonisation, but also for energy resilience and security and supporting decarbonisation of our manufacturing sectors. So that's a little bit of an intro from our side. And now I'll hand over to Dennis, who's going to talk to his.
Thanks, Johanna. For those who don't know me, I'm Dennis van Pervelde, the Head of Renewable Gas at Energy Networks Australia. So as Johanna said, we've been collaborating with Bioenergy Australia for many years on and off. And basically we're trying to advance the role of biomethane in Australia. And it's great to be able to present this joint webinar with Bioenergy Australia for you. So ENA commissioned Blunomy earlier this year to help us better understand the biomethane opportunities in Australia. So you're probably aware that there's been a number of different studies completed in the last few years that provide different biomethane potential opportunities. But these studies sometimes are state-focused, sometimes are focused on a potential close to a particular network or limited to particular feedstocks. So we wanted Blunomy to collate this information and bring it all together in a comprehensive report. And we also asked them to more clearly map out the preferred energy pathways for different feedstocks. And this shows some interesting synergies both now and into the future. Lastly, we asked Blunomy to consider the biomethane across the East Coast. I thought it was really important because currently natural gas on the East Coast is delivered by pipelines that connect north and south, and gas flows north and south and vice versa. So I thought it's important to look at it holistically across the East Coast because biomethane could use that same infrastructure to deliver renewable gas across the East Coast. So it's my pleasure then to introduce the Blunomy team. So we've got Hugo Khalifa, who's the manager at Blunomy, and he heads up the Sydney office. And we've also got Kevin Lowe online, who's the principal at Blunomy, who heads up their renewable fuels practices across the Asia Pacific. So they will talk to the biomethane opportunities to decarbonise Australian industry report. After the presentation, I'll facilitate a Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A box and vote them up and down if you can. I think we had a bit of a switch around, so we're going to ask Blunomy to do their report first. And then when they're finished, I'll get Johanna to introduce Matt Walden from Deloitte. So Kevin and Hugo, over to you.
You guys maybe as we share the presentation, but yeah, just to echo what Dennis had mentioned.
Hi Dennis, might just click right in there. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Maybe I'll just hand over to Hugo right now to start us off and be wrapping it up later on.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, thank you, Kevin, and nice to meet you all. And thanks, Dennis and Shana, for the intro. So yeah, as mentioned, we've been supporting ENA on working on this piece of work on biomethane, and there are 6 different key messages that we would like to share with you today as part of this report. The first one is that approximately 400 petajoule per year of biomethane is today recoverable in Australia, offering a new gas source for Australia decarbonization targets, and also being a way to unlock waste value, which is currently unused through untapped feedstock. Speaking about feedstock, the existing feedstock in Australia is suitable for biomethane production and is already present across different states in Australia. And its recovery will help to scale up the biomethane productions, but there is also some strong synergies with other energy pathways, such as low carbon liquid fuel, that we will look at further in the presentation. Biomethane can be distributed through the existing gas network, which is in fact positioned in this gas network at a central position in the energy system and to support the biomethane uptake. The first 50 petajoule per year of biomethane can be brought to market at a cost between $10 and $27 per gigajoule, knowing that these costs are more target costs for the industry, appreciating that some of early stage development could potentially face some higher costs, but this is somehow a target cost range that we've aggregated as part of the study. In this sector, further policy support is required to help to lower the costs of the development of the sector, but also more on a mid to long-term perspective to help to increase the bioenergy potential across the different feedstock available. And just to give a sense about the magnitude at present on the East Coast, the biomethane potential, which is technically recoverable, represents 96% of current gas consumption on the East Coast of Australia. So I'll take some time to deep dive across all of these key messages in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And starting with the recoverable potential of biomethane today, if we take a step back first on the biomethane is really a readily available solution that demonstrated technical feasibility and commercial viability in other jurisdictions, such as the US, in Europe, and some parts of Asia, and get full support Australia energy transition commitments, and specifically where electrification is not practical or cost effective. The real strength of the sector lies in diverting existing waste and unused waste, leveraging the existing gas infrastructure, but also making it as a solution which can be immediately deployable in Australia. And we do believe it's also a driver of regional development, specifically through the construction of new biomethane plant and the operation of this plant, but also the development of a supply chain to support the feedstock sourcing and transport across Australia. And last but not least, is also a way to strengthen Australia's sovereignty by enhancing the fuel security. And so all of this is I would say, driving some key questions that our report try to respond to. First one being, how much will biomethane help Australia reach its decarbonisation goals? Is there enough suitable feedstock for biomethane in Australia? How can biomethane fit into the current energy system? And what is needed to make the biomethane competitive and viable? So starting with the feedstock, the good news is that there is a wide range of variety of feedstock which is suitable for biomethane development at present, and specifically through anaerobic digestion technology, which is a technically mature and low-risk solution which is deployed across different jurisdictions. About the feedstock, it's spanning from food organics, garden organics, residues from cereal, but non-cereals also, like canola, sugarcane vinasse, livestock residue, but also horticultural residue. While all this feedstock can be used, as a single feedstock in anaerobic digestion, there is also a way to improve the yield of the production by using combination of this feedstock that's called co-digestion, and which allowing to improve the yield of the biogas and biomethane production. And something which is also really interesting is that all of these wastes somehow are not directly competing with food production, allowing to have somehow limited conflict and trade-off to do between energy generation and food. If we continue on this feedstock assessment, we've been looking at in more details, the perceived competition across different energy pathway in Australia. And having looked a bit further at this, what we found is quite encouraging. And instead of direct competition between the different energy uses. There is in fact more synergies that we could believe. And so, for example, between cereal and non-cereal feedstock, we can see that there is strong synergies with using the same feedstock for different energy pathway. So the grain, for example, could support or could fill the low carbon liquid fuel, while the residue is going to support more the biomethane as being an input for the process. Sugarcane is another example, and an interesting one where we do have different wastes across the sugar production, from trash and bagasse, which is in fact an input for cogeneration, to molasses going more toward the low carbon liquid fuel, and the vinasse being an input in the biomethane production. So these feedstocks, which are represented here, are generally less aggregated by nature, cereal, for example, or sugarcane, but it's building the case to have a supply chain in place to support, in fact, not only the biomethane, but also other energy pathways, such as the low carbon liquid fuel in the future, and taking advantage of this single supply chain for the feedstock. I think moving forward on the third key message, it's pretty clear that the existing gas network is playing a key role in the biomethane uptake and in the energy system here. It all starts with current feedstock, which is turned into first biogas and then upgraded into biomethane. And by nature, the chemical composition of the biomethane being similar to natural gas, the existing gas network is a great asset to support the uptake of the biomethane and serve different customers connected onto the network. Beyond this biomethane, there are also different byproducts which are providing different benefits across different sectors. The first one being the digestate, which is a natural fertilizer, allowing to displace the artificial fertilizer used in different industries, such as horticulture, agriculture, but also some materials industries. But there's also another byproduct which is of interest, which is the biogenic CO2, which is used in different activities in food processing. And beyond this biomethane, there are also other end use that we saw just before, the low carbon liquid fuel, with different production pathway, but using similar feedstock, and for which in the future, the biomethane could be also an input for this low carbon liquid fuel, serving different sectors that are also allowing to decarbonize across the board Australia. And this is aviation, roads, and maritime, for example. And so within this picture, the gas network is really playing a central role in supporting these different sectors. And beyond that, we believe that future improvements in technology and feedstock supply could continue to bring opportunities to develop both biomethane and low carbon liquid fuel. And so it all starts with, as mentioned before, the biomethane being a future input for low carbon liquid food production, as you can see with specific ATR process or reverse water also process from CO2 to low carbon liquid fuel. There's also new ways to produce biomethane, such as gasification, which is another process which in the future could support to increase the volume of biomethane generation beyond just using the AED, but also getting access to new feedstock, such as, for example, woody feedstocks. And also thirdly, there is the possibility in the future with new development to get benefits from the power to X technologies, where the idea is to use renewable electricity and water to generate biomethane, but also CO2, which will be also turned into a low carbon liquid fuel. And so in this picture, the biomethane is really a key lever to deliver societal and system level benefits by first, I would say, enhancing the waste management outcomes, converting all this waste into energy, supporting to lower the methane emissions from this waste, but also to improve practices around circular economy. And at the end of the day, benefiting for various customers we just discussed before, and for which the network gas infrastructure is really playing a key role to support the rapid deployment and cost-effective transport of this biomethane. Now, looking at the costs associated to the recoverable biomethane potential, the literature review is providing a range of $10 to $50 per gigajoule for this biomethane, depending on the type of feedstock and the type of project. And we've been looking at different scenarios to understand the impact of such scenarios on these costs for biomethane production, starting with the status quo, which is somehow a scenario where nothing is changing compared to where things are at now. Another one, which is looking at policy improvements, or specifically recovery practices, which are allowing, in fact, to increase the recoverable potential, which is currently existing. And for example, it's having some specific practices for banning some of the burning of existing zero residue, or banning some of the stubble management, which will help to increase the potential which is accessible, or also to divert somehow some organic waste that are going to landfill and using it as a way to produce biomethane in the future. And there's a third scenario, which is where we would use, or the idea is to use marginal lands to develop specific an energy crop, which are not directly entering into competition with food, but rather having the use of some lands which are between some cultivated areas, where we could use some cover crops, which somehow is not used for food, but could have some high yield in the future and will support also this biomethane potential. And so across these different scenarios, what we do see is that the first 50 petajoule per year could be delivered at a range between $10 and $27 per gigajoule in 2030. And this higher range of $27 per gigajoule will also decrease up to 23 gigajoule in 2050. Again, and as mentioned before, we appreciate that for the first of the kind projects, there will be potentially higher costs in the development of such biomethane, but more on the longer term, this is what could be expected as a target for a range of costs. And across this sector, the policy is indeed going to play a key role in the uptake. First, by helping to make this recoverable potential more tangible. It will be in the form of supporting the offer from the production side. We could envisage having some support in the form of capex or grants to assist in the development of the projects. So also some specific incentives to support the supply chain to getting access to different stock, and somehow also having some financial instruments to help to value more the output from the biomethane, such as feed-in tariff, which is something which is in place in Europe, for example. More on the demand side, we could also envisage some market-based incentives, having, for example, some mandates or some specific targets for byproducts, such as biogenic CO2, also creating some conditions to favor a market for digestate, which is a byproduct, but will also help to have traction on the market, but also having some a target for biomethane production. And more on the longer run, the policy will play a key role in also expanding this biomethane potential with, on the right of this slide, different time frame. At first, 25 onwards, having some policy in place to support and incentive the access to feedstock, specifically making sure that there is a good use of what's existing to fuel as much as possible anaerobic digesters to develop or produce biomethane. On the second time, and more after 2030, is having specific measure in place to make sure that oily feedstock will be diverted away from export towards more domestic use for the low carbon liquid fuel. And as we saw just before in the presentation, there are strong complementarities between this LCLF and the biomethane, which will therefore use those sectors. 2035 onwards, having new energy crops, and this is again what I mentioned before, cover crops that will be cultivated to really serve specific bioenergy pathways and that will not enter in competition with food directly. And the last one, which is more on this longer run, is having this marginal land, which is again having specific areas where the soil quality is potentially a bit poorer and more difficult to have some food crop, but specifically where there could be value to have dedicated crops to develop for the biomethane production. Perhaps just one last comment is to give a sense about the order of magnitude of this potential. And on the East Coast, the technical biomethane potential represents almost 100% of the gas consumption, being 96%. So on the East Coast states, collectively, these different states are consuming around 478 petajoules of gas annually, with demand being split across industrial, residential, commercial, and gas power generation. And so across this east side of Australia, the technical potential would be in the range of this 96%. And even if we look at the recoverable potential, which is in fact taking into consideration more technical, economic, and logistical constraints, the lower side of this recoverable potential would be representing a quarter of this East Coast fossil gas demand, which is again showing that this potential could be supporting the decarbonization targets of Australia. So these were the different key messages we wanted to share with you today, and being the key outcome of the report we've done. I'll let Kevin just discuss a bit more about the recommendations and next steps we do see.
Thanks, Hugo. Just really running through some of the key conclusions from what Hugo has presented. We believe that biomethane today can support Australia's 2030 and 2035 decarbonisation targets, considering the fact that biomethane is a drop-in fuel essentially that replaces natural gas, and Australia already has such developed gas infrastructure as well as network and use equipment. And not just that, it actually feeds into the circular economy story beyond just looking at low carbon. That's where we see biomethane play a very significant role in the environmental and climate ambitions that Australia has. Number two, many of the existing feedstock are very well suited for biomethane. Organic waste today is already being recovered, and significant that recovery is increasing because of government's waste management policies. And as we increasingly explore diverting organic waste away from landfills, biomethane is very well positioned to be produced from this waste to valorize it and increase value to the waste management industry. And I've already mentioned about biomethane being a drop-in fuel. What the advantage is that it can eventually contribute to low carbon fuel production, given that it's connected to gas networks and can serve effectively as the logistics network and for future low carbon liquid fuels. And then there's less of a need for plants to be necessarily co-located very close to feedstock supply chains when biomethane can be used, can be transported in existing gas network. And point 4, we can slide. Thank you. Point 4, biomethane plays a really complementary role. We've pointed out a few ways in which there are synergies from the biogenic CO2, from the case of biomethane being refined into LCLF. At the same time, there are other new pathways that may be developed further in the future, beyond the fact that just biomethane today allows us to develop and scale up the feedstock value chain that could also contribute to the LCLF market. And the last 2 points, there is opportunities itself to actually increase technical feedstock potential, whether it's through new novel crops and pathways or feedstocks. And given that there are concerns about land space competition, there are a lot of new crops that are actually able to rehabilitate marginal land which offers an even bigger potential opportunity for biofuels in general, but also biomethane. And finally, based on what we look at, there is definitely still some degree of commercial gap that exists, and policy supports would definitely allow us to bring the first couple of PJs into the market and reduce the cost in order for the market to take off. And as Hugo mentioned, a lot of that the cost figures that we've surveyed are basically levelized cost of energy. If we were to have more projects developed and better processes that's structured for development approvals and for these projects to go through, the industry would be able to move towards those target prices and deliver biomethane at competitive rates. And I think with that, I'll hand over the time back to Bioenergy Australia for the next presentation.
Awesome, thank you so much. And now our plan is to do joint Q&A at the very end of the webinar, and Dennis is going to manage questions with both, but please continue to pop questions in the chat, and we are responding to those as they come through. So I suppose looking at the two different reports, the first report that has been presented was really around the opportunity. It's around supply and what that could represent in Australia. What the Bioenergy Australia report seek to do was to really identify the demand, the potential demand, and what that opportunity around the role of biomethane in supporting some of these really important sectors. So Matt Walden from Deloitte is going to be presenting the report, but I suppose a couple of key points that I wanted to really pull out when we discussed commissioning this piece, we really wanted to ensure that there was a strong understanding of the role of gas in Australia's energy system and not underestimating that role, and to really be able to look at the role that biomethane can play in supporting gas replacement in these sectors. So, you know, gas powers Australia's $100 billion manufacturing industries, and manufacturing Australia's largest gas user, accounting for 52% of gas usage. Now, for a lot of those sectors, a lot of those businesses, it's going to be incredibly challenging for them to be able to electrify in the short to medium term. And so the role of biomethane being able to support that is really important. In addition to that, we wanted to prove that this is not a future technology that we're waiting to have come online. That the biomethane is up, it is operating, it is delivering at scale globally. And that, you know, as one example, over 1,650 plants are now operating in Europe alone. And so our report really seeks to quite nicely sit next to the Energy Networks Australia report, talking to what biomethane can do in really supporting that demand side. So the report's name is Unlocking Renewable Natural Gas to Enhance Energy Security and Maintain Australia's Manufacturing Sector. Also, I suppose, one point that we have sought to thread through this report was around, you know, unlocking new streams of gas into our gas system as we are starting to see, you know, shortages emerge over the next 10 years. That's also a very key point. So I will now hand over to Matt Walden from Deloitte, who delivered this report for us to run through, and then at the end, Dennis will do some Q&A with both. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you very much, Shahana and Georgie, for the opportunity to talk today. My name is Matt Walden. I'm a partner within Deloitte's Energy and Climate Advisory Group, and I'm very proud to be supported by a couple of my colleagues on the call today. And I'm going to talk through, as Shahana mentioned, some of our findings that we've discovered as part of our work that is part of the report that we presented. We also had the benefit of working with Dennis, the ENEA team, and the Blunomy team through this as well. So I'd like to think this is a very strong collaboration across these various organisations to align what is a very important and common narrative. And I'll talk through some of those findings today, but also important to flag why this is an opportunity for a number of reasons for Australia, and as to why we should be moving on this as an opportunity today. And a lot of this is built on the great work that Bioenergy Australia has done going back to the Bioenergy Roadmap and beyond. And this work really does build on that. Natural gas does play a key role in our energy system. It has for a very long time, and it will into the future. It accounts for about 26% of our total energy supply. And in the Australian government's future gas strategy, this recognises that natural gas will play a critical role into the future, and we need to be accepting of that for a number of reasons. Over 1,000 petajoules of natural gas were consumed in the last financial year, and that was comprised of a couple of very important end-use cases. And it was about half-half for electricity generation and the residual half for use within industry and other applications. So its broad use needs to be highlighted. And of that use case, which is probably quite important for the subject we're talking about today, those largest users were manufacturing, which represented about half of that demand, residential, which was another quarter, and then mining, which was about 15% or 12-15% of that residual amount. And natural gas is the largest energy source for end consumers within those sectors, in particular manufacturing being a very critical, important feedstock and use, energy use for that sector. And if you look at those sectors in detail, they represent close to 20% of our GDP. So they are of critical importance to our national economy and our productivity, which leads to the next slide, where I'll talk to some of these key sectors where this is of critical importance, and where, again, natural gas will need to be a very important fuel or energy source for many decades to come. In terms of those manufacturing industries, a quick identification of those by sector indicates it represents about $100 billion of GDP benefit to the national economy. And it's actually used for a broad range of feedstocks. So if you dig down to some of these sectors, you can start to understand the specific use cases, and then importantly, what some of their alternate pathways are in, say, an emission-constrained world or with certain decarbonisation objectives, and I will touch on that in a second. And some of those critical sectors where natural gas is in particularly a feedstock as opposed to a traditional energy source include some of those specialised industries such as metals, chemicals, cement, bricks, plastic manufacturing, food and beverage, and things like fertiliser and ammonia production, all of which are very critical to a range of industries. But also important to flag that as it stands today, that natural gas as an energy source is critical for things like glass manufacturing, paper, and common household use cases. And I will touch on in a second, but if you do look at these individual sectors, the opportunity for decarbonisation are sometimes limited. And that's not just an economic proposition, it's also a technical one, whereby the gas as a feedstock, there isn't yet an alternate technology pathway for that sector, and thus having a low or a zero emission gas is actually a very important proposition for those industries meeting their long-term carbon abatement objectives in particular. If you look here on the screen, this is some work that we did for the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, admittedly as part of some low carbon liquid fuel work, of which our report has recently been released. But what we did with this work was identify critical sectors that Australia operates within, and looking at particularly from an energy use case, and really looking to understand where alternate technologies, and in particular electrification, can and will play a certain role. And if I try to broadly sort of work through this here, we've identified a number of drivers which would potentially support these sectors looking at alternate technologies. However, important to flag that for a number, there actually isn't a pathway. So I pick an obvious one there. If you look on the bottom right of the visual, the sectors such as aviation and maritime, the outlook from an electrification point of view is actually quite limited. So the need for those sectors to find alternate decarbonisation pathways, such as low carbon liquid fuels, is actually quite critical. And if you work your way up that visual, this represents the sector's proportion that they cannot electrify. So again, if I pick on a couple of examples there, things like manufacturing, things like our utility sectors, agriculture and mining sectors will all need non-electrified solutions to allow them to meet their long-term objectives. And it is part of this is why renewable natural gas or biomethane can be a really critical lever for these sectors meeting their long-term objectives. And I said to pick out a few that are quite important. High temperature heat was a very important sector that at present there is limited technology pathways to meet the requirements there. Gas as a chemical feedstock, again, that's one where there isn't necessarily an alternate pathway. A number of them have electrification solutions, however, are very cost prohibitive compared to alternatives such as alternate liquid fuels or low carbon gas products. And for some businesses, and this will be for a number of them, where they sit within a value chain also prohibits them using alternate technologies, which leads itself to being renewable natural gas is a very logical solution for a number of these sectors to meet those long-term objectives. As Shahana mentioned in the previous presentation flagged, renewable natural gas or biomethane as a proposition is a very technology mature proposition. It's commercially proven and technically proven both here in Australia and also internationally. And particularly the broad deployment in international markets in the EU demonstrate that this as an opportunity is a here and now and not a future pathway. And if I just narrow in on the most traditional pathways being the anaerobic digestion pathway, which again is very common here in Australia and demonstrated, albeit less so for biomethane production, but also then the back end of that process being the biogas to biomethane upgrading process, which draws on quite mature technology, particularly demonstrated in the oil and gas sector. And we do have one reference project here in Australia that is technically demonstrating that today. And if I just look at a couple of statistics, so in Australia, we have in excess of 240 AD facilities, but today they're primarily used for waste treatment and for a limited degree electricity generation. And it's this as a use case that can very easily be changed with very small policy changes that would incentivize that fuel or feedstock being diverted to higher and better value use cases. As I said, there is one single commercial scale facility operating here in Australia, which is the facility at Malabar, a venture between Sydney Water and Gemina. And that has successfully demonstrated a number of first-of-a-kind things here in Australia. Firstly, an important one, that biomethane can meet the definition of gas as required to be injected into the pipelines, which is a very critical first step. It has demonstrated implementation of this technology with critical infrastructure, being a wastewater treatment facility. It has demonstrated the regulatory regime, so being able to integrate into a regulated gas pipeline, contracting models, bringing together, as I mentioned, Sydney Water, Gemina and Origin from a contracting point of view, and probably most importantly, demonstrated or facilitated the introduction of certification schemes, which allow this product to be transacted more broadly than the physical product may be so. Feedstocks, and I think was mentioned earlier, I won't go into that into too much detail, but feedstock that can be utilised to produce RNG is very broad, and the Bioenergy roadmap does do a lot of work looking to quantify that, and the Blunomy report has estimated that. It is an area that we will need to continue to investigate, so providing that information to government and industry will facilitate further decision making. And we'll also, as we progress the industry, bridge, if you like, the cost gap that may be perceived between renewable natural gas, traditional natural gas, and other solutions such as hydrogen, which has obviously been quite prominent over the last couple of years. So important to flag that. But also, it is very evident with appropriate, in particular, policy drivers, there is a very credible story that will support the cost reduction of renewable natural gas to be competitive with traditional fuel pathways. But when we do look at that, it's important to identify that we're not necessarily bridging to that single molecule, but what we are bridging to is a decarbonised product. Despite it being an indistinguishable molecule of gas, it is actually a low or a zero emission molecule that, again, needs to be identified and the value as such reflected in that commodity. So from a feedstock point of view, and again, the Bluonomy presentation did cover this in some detail, we have as a nation quite significant potential of recoverable feedstock in Australia to support our local requirements and the ability to expand that further, which is quite important with a very established, for example, agricultural sector. It is, however, an area that we still need to continue to refine because with the information and aligned policy will support industry making those critical investment decisions. If you look at the industry as it stands today, and I'll revert back to biogas, this makes up approximately 3% of gas consumption in Australia. So from a growth point of view, quite significant potential there that we can realise. And the ability to recognise that can be utilised for a number of use cases where it is traditionally, in many cases, either flared for carbon credit generation carbon credit generation, or otherwise renewable electricity. So as we define and understand those barriers and with coordinated action, we can actually unlock this potential. And this feedstock benefit will not just be realised from a gas molecule point of view, but also some of those other hard to abate sectors. And it is bringing industry together, including under the banner of Bioenergy Australia and ENA, that will allow us to realise that. So if I quickly run through some of the key findings and conclusions within our report, the manufacturing industries in particular will be expected to experience increased costs due to carbon pressures within those sectors, and that's both within Australia but also more broader with things like carbon border adjustment taxes. And if you look at some of the government modelling, some of those values per carbon credit unit or cost of carbon start to approach $500 a tonne equivalent in 2050 and beyond. So it will represent quite a significant cost. Low carbon natural gas alternatives are quite limited. And I mentioned that earlier, particularly as we've looked at a number of technology pathways for these sectors. So it is an area that if we want to meet our ambitions, we need to start to unlock these alternate use cases, because in many cases there will not be alternative pathways. And equally, and probably importantly, Australia as a nation, and this has again been quite prominent with AEMO, within AEMO's correspondence, indicates that our reserves are quite finite. And there are varying reports around the ability to continue to unlock those reserves. So the ability to supplement that with other use cases or other sources of gas, including biomethane, become critically important. So one of the key drivers here is policy, and we have seen policy start to move in other decarbonisation sectors such as the electricity and low carbon liquid fuels. But flagging when we do get those policy levers, what some of these benefits could realise, and in particular, renewable natural gas as a feedstock for industrial decarbonisation solutions in those challenge sectors such as high temperature heat and feedstock become quite important. And for those sectors, renewable natural gas provides a drop-in solution. So there is no requirement to alter your infrastructure, and you're able to use that as a drop-in solution and actually take up that fuel as a step change. Another very important flag, and again consistent with the low carbon liquid fuel sector, is it provides a enhanced national energy security narrative, allowing our ability to supply our own fuel cases. And importantly, again, with the nexus back to our critical sectors such as agriculture, allows quite a significant value add to be realised there. So just in wrapping up the findings from the report, with relatively identifiable changes to policy, and again, policy that's been demonstrated in other sectors here in Australia, but particularly in Europe and North America, we'll be actually able to unlock quite significant benefit at relatively modest cost to support a number of sectors, decarbonise and also drive benefit within those sectors. And as we progress towards things like 2030 targets, the ability to realise that becomes of critical importance. So what I might just also flag here is a tool that we've developed, and again in consultation with a number of people on this call, is the importance of looking at the supply chain from feedstock through to that end use case. Admittedly, here this is for liquid fuel, but I will highlight that as we stand today, despite the potential for competition for feedstock, it is actually a very complementary position, whereby we need to be able to identify and unlock feedstock to meet those targets. And I would encourage you, if this is an area of interest for you, to please have a look at this tool, and it will provide you with some context around where some of these feedstock opportunities are likely to exist, where they aren't, and in particular, what price points we're likely to be able to realise them at. So I will conclude there, Shahana, and pass back to yourself or Dennis to facilitate questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Over to you, Dennis.
Thanks, Shahana. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Kevin and Hugo. It's been great to have those presentations. Interesting tool that you mentioned towards the end there, Matt. It's complementary to the work that Future Fuel CRC has done on looking at a similar tool for biomethane. But questions, there's been a number of questions that have been answered in the chat already, but I might just go through a few of them and we'll have a bit of a discussion about that. I know we've only got a few minutes left. But there's one here, I think, Matt, which was for you, which was a question about whether you could provide any more details on the opportunity to use biomethane as a feedstock for metals, and in particular for applications like alumina refinery and aluminium smelting.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. And that's a really good question. And what I would flag for that is those two sectors in particular have established quite credible roadmaps from a decarbonisation point of view. The alumina sector in particular has demonstrated the use of alternate fuels within that sector already, and there's a number of Western Australian facilities that have established that as well. The lens has been predominantly as both as a feedstock, but also a high temperature heat application. So it will absolutely be critical for those two sectors, Dennis. But what I would probably flag is that it's upstream from that as well that becomes quite critical, of critical importance, all the way from an extraction point of view to processing. So those metal sectors, and this is a challenge within the Bureau of Statistics, how they represent some of these sectors. You actually need to look at an integrated supply chain to understand the full challenge that they will actually face.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. There's another question. There's a few other questions, but there's a few that have been asked about the distance between the biomass resource and the actual digester or the use of the plant on the proximity of the network. I know some of the comments here have been about 50 kilometres or 50 to 100 kilometres. Probably an open question to all of you, to Kevin and Hugo and Matt, of what are your views on what is a realistic distance for collecting the biomass and making a competitive form of biomethane?
Yeah,
Kevin?
maybe I can answer this question. We've looked at this in several different environments, and realistically, the actual distance or displacement is really just a guideline, because the existence of that road network actually matters even more. So you could be 50 kilometers in terms of displacement, but you're not connected by a direct road network, and that makes it prohibitively costly to move feedstock from point A to B. What we think is viable today could be up to 50 or even 100. I am aware, and I've just kind of dropped one of the replies to one of the questions, that there are technologies densifying feedstocks that could actually help to shave off the transport costs on a per energy yield basis. So it's difficult to nail down on the distance, because if you would go further out to secure feedstock that is of higher energy yield, but when the energy yield is really low, then it's not worthwhile even going 20 kilometers. So I think it's maybe a bit of a straw man to try and target a particular distance, but it really boils down to what feedstock we're referring to and what sort of technology is deployed to optimize that logistics.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. And Matt, just following on from that, is there is it the same distance for biomethane or sustainable aviation fuels? Is it, or does that change?
Yeah, Dennis. Then, a great question, Dennis. I'm just going to go on mute. A great question, Dennis. And it is eventually becomes quite a numbers game in the end. And the comment that Kevin made around energy density is absolutely critical. Your feedstock type, location, and commercial proposition for the feedstock is quite important as well. And even to the point of view where two feedstocks may have different commercial alternative pathways. So the opportunity cost that exists for that resource owner becomes quite critical. I would sort of agree with Kevin's comment. Our analysis suggests that depending on the opportunity cost for that feedstock, up to a 100-kilometre radius could be commercially viable. Would find that with an aviation fuel where there is the potential to realise a premium, particularly if you measure that on a per tonne abated basis, which is how aviation fuel is commonly, SAF is commonly priced, you are likely to get a potentially higher yield. But what I would say, Dennis, is it's a very theoretical answer, and you would find the practical application in each case would be quite different.
Yeah, good point. So moving on, I mean, one of the, and this is not a question in the chat, this is my question. One of the things that the CFC's come up with in a report just last week was the international competition for this feedstock as well. Do you have any views on that? Should Australia, I mean, it's probably a bit more of a policy question, should Australia try and protect that feedstock for its own decarbonisation, or should we export it?
Happy to go first on that one, Dennis. And that tool that I presented at the end, part of that was to answer that question, Dennis, because there is a risk if you look at other sectors such as iron ore, where we export quite a raw product or an intermediate product rather than a refined product, leaves a lot of value-added proposition in other jurisdictions. And at this nascent stage of these industries, and again, I'll hone in on aviation fuel for a minute, there is a very material risk that we lose the early mover advantage to that integrated supply chain to other jurisdictions.
Yes.
You will find, and again, if you utilise that tool, you'll see that a country like Japan, and to be very obvious, its stated SAF objectives are unable to be met by its local feedstock resources. That by virtue means it will be needing to import some element of that value chain, and for the benefit of Australia, both from an energy security point of view and also from an economic development point of view, we should be at all intents and purposes attempting to capture as much of that value as we can here in Australia.
Yeah, thanks. That's good response. Kevin or Hugo, did you want to add anything to that?
No, nothing further to add. I think that came
okay. So I know we're nearly out of time, and there's a lot more questions in there which we won't get through. But maybe the one that did come to mind is, what are the key barriers? Maybe one barrier from each of you, from Kevin, Hugo, and Matt. What's the one barrier stopping this happening? So, because the question I was asking 3, so if you come up with one each, that provides 3. So whoever goes first gets the easiest answer.
Okay, I'm jumping in first. Thanks, Dennis. For me, Dennis, it's the commercial element. So I've had the benefit of advising a number of biomethane project developers on their projects. And the thing that I am very surprised by is their high level of sophistication around the technical deployment of a biogas to biomethane project. And what it transpires to is the end element. And I'll put it in sort of the bucket of certification or otherwise that would allow that to happen. And if you look at the Green Power initiative, that allows the monetization, but it doesn't reflect the value add that's there. So small policy adjustments, utilising an existing scheme that's been defined with the guarantee of origin and gas guarantee of origin will allow that realisation to occur.
Thanks, Matt. Hugo or Kevin?
Yeah, happy to jump and let Kevin, I think, the last one. But I think overall the commercial side mentioned by Mike is really important. perhaps bringing in some of the things we do see overseas, especially in Europe, where there is maturity in this sector, is that the supply side is somehow supported by some mechanisms that are allowing to shorten the project payback periods. So it can be in the form of different things. You can imagine having some grant and subsidies to support the development of projects, or some feed-in tariff, which are allowing to have some more certainty from investors and developers' perspectives. I'm not sure that it's the only way for this to happen. It's one of the levers which are existing, but for sure, when it's providing some certainty on the investment side and development side, it's where we can envisage that it's allowing to have a significant uptake on the sector. I know that there are some things which are currently envisaged, and we'll have some perspective later this year of what it means for the sector. But from a broad perspective, it's something which is quite significant in my search.
Thanks, Hugo.
And
Kevin, quickly.
yeah, just a quick one. I think Matt covered commercial, Hugo covered policy. I think regulatory as well. There's a need to really break down the silos across the different sectors that bioenergy, biomethane in particular covers, which includes waste, energy, and agriculture. There's currently not enough crisscrossing and communications between them, and engagement of regulators across this different sphere to understand that we're all getting to a common outcome that will benefit Australia together. Yeah,
no, that's great. So thanks for that. So we're at the end now. So just Kevin, Hugo, and Matt, thank you very much for your presentations. I think there's been a lot of interest, as you can see in the chat, and by the number of participants on the call. This is a fascinating area. I think the biomethane opportunity is just amazing in Australia, and we should really get hold of it. But before I close off, I might just see if Shahana wants to make any closing remarks.
Yeah, I probably just would like to reinforce exactly what you've said, Dennis. Obviously, this is a massive opportunity in Australia. It's technology ready. Let's not hold out. Let's get on with it. Decarbonisation and increasing our energy supply. It's a really important space. Bioenergy Australia, we will continue to be fighting the good fight and putting this in front of as many political decision makers as we possibly can, and very much looking forward to working with the membership and broader stakeholders to get this going.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.